This is like a Bible in my sewing room, Fit for Real People by Patty Palmer and Marta Alto. Its copyright date 1998, but the information is still right on. The styles might be a little bit dated, but the information is all in here. I never traveled anywhere to teach anything without this in my suitcase. Enough said, and I know you can find it online. All right. Patterns these days are multi-sized. You see we've got several different sizes to cut. This was the size 12, 14, 16, but that's great because I now have determined that I'm going to cut the size 14 up here around the shoulders. But I really need to know not only what my body measurements are, I need to know if I sew up this pattern given a certain size, how much fabric is going to be there, how much room is going to be in it. If I'm going to make this out of a woven fabric to which there's no stretch, don't I have to have some wiggle room? That's what's called fitting ease. So like around the bust, you need at least 2 inches. Around the hips, you need 2 inches. It's that room that allows you to move within a garment. And then on top of fitting ease, there's what's called design ease. That's what gives a garment its silhouette, its look. This garment is obviously a fairly close-fitting sheath. Let me show you how I measure check a pattern, given that I have my high bust, my full bust, my waist, my back waist length, my waist, and my hips. All right. These days we have some measurements right here on the pattern. Do you see these arrows? And right here at this location, it's telling me that a size 14 stitched up is going to be 41 inches. Well, I'm 39.5. That's going to give me enough wiggle room in there. That's 1.5 inches, but that's fine. So I know that it's likely going to fit me around the bust. It also gives you those measurements for around the hip, and exactly where these arrows are is where they have measured it. But let me show you how you can measure it yourself if these measurement charts aren't included. Do you know that a typical tape measure is 5/8 of an inch wide? Pretty cool. These are cutting lines, right? Not sewing lines. And seam allowances are not included in the garment once we sew it up. So right here I'm going to put the tape measure and make a little mark, so that tells me that's the seam line. And I'm going to do the same thing here on the back at the same place. And then I can measure check. So if I come over here, it's right at the top of the dart, so I don't really have to take anything out. But if I come all the way over here, that's 10 1/4. But that's half of the front, right? So that's really 20 1/2. 10 1/4 twice is 20 1/2. So I've got 20 1/2 in the front, and I usually just write this on the pattern. And now if I were to measure check the back, I would do the same thing. Now, when you have a dart, that dart's going to get stitched out as well. And right here, it really is crossing this back dart. So I can see that 4 1/4 is right here at this stitching line of the dart. So I'm just going to scoot the 4 1/4 over to the other stitching line of the dart. Now I have not included that dart in my measurement, and I come over here and it's 10 1/8. Well, I'm not going to add with 8, so I'm just going to say 10 plus. Or actually, before when I measured it was 10 1/4. So let's say 10 1/4. So 20 1/2 plus 10 1/4 is, in fact, well, but we have to double this, right? So that's 20 1/2. So I have 20 1/2 in the front, 20 1/2 in the back, 20 1/2, and 20 1/2 is 41 inches, which is indeed exactly what this little measurement said. So they and I agree. I have verified that what they said this was going to sew up to be is right. So likely it's the same thing at the hip. I did the same thing. But you can tell down here, see here I am on the size 14, and I know I'm a little generous around the hip. So I came not only to the 16, but a little bit further out than that. All right? So when I measure checked around the hip line from where I'm going to cut, and when I did all the math here, if I cut out there on the front and out here on the back, I am going to have 44 3/4. All right? And if my hips are 42 1/2, plus I need 2 inches ease, that would give me 43 1/2, and I've calculated that I have 44 3/4. So hip, hip, hooray, I know it's going to be big enough. All right? If it's too big, I can always take it in a little bit. All right? So I know that I'm safe. There's one other thing that I would double check really quick in this process, and that is your back waist length. So up here at the neckline, it doesn't say this neckline is a ½ inch or an inch below the base of the neck, and the base of the neck is where a necklace would rest. So you're going to measure that on yourself from where a necklace rests down to your actual waist. And gals, that is not this lower line where so many wear the top of their pants these days. It is closer to your belly button. It's where your body bends. That is your God-given waist. That is what's considered the waist as we do garment sewing. So my back waist length is 17, and if I measure here on this pattern, it comes to 16 3/4. So you know what? There's no real waist line. There's just some shaping. So it was rare for me. I generally have to add at least an inch to the back waist length. But on this one, it was close enough. I did not have to do that. And I've made this pattern twice now, so I know that it fits fine. But if that had been shorter, if it had been like 16, what I would have done on both the back and the front is I would have cut along this line, spread it an inch, put tissue paper in underneath, taped it down so that the shaping of the garment occurred where my God-given shaping occurs. All right? So that's basically how you measure check a pattern, so that you don't just cut and pray. You think, you measure, you check, and then you cut. Taking those steps, you will have much more success as you sew your garments. And guess what? You don't have to sew a size label in when you're done. At the very end of taping this video on measure checking a pattern, I was just quickly laying my pattern pieces together and starting to go like this. But you know what? That's kind of sloppy, and when I go to make this pattern again, it will really save time in the long run if you do this. If you take each pattern piece and fold it with the number of the piece up to a size that's going to fit into the pattern envelope. So there's the back sleeve, piece number 4, here's the front sleeve, piece number 3, the facings, I'll probably lay them together. But on these bigger pieces, the back and the front, don't do as I started to do. Take a minute, be neat, and fold your pattern pieces so that you can see the number of the pattern piece, and so that you're folding it small enough to get into the pattern envelope. I won't take time to fold that one here at the end of this video, but do you see what I'm saying? That really is much nicer than wadding them all up together. It took me years to get myself to the place where I would make myself do that, but it's just so much more of a joy to open up a pattern and be able to see each piece.